And so that has led me to, exploring sexuality and sensuality and man-woman relating and the real hot spots of where shame keeps a lot of our vital force energy arrested. I've used science, perhaps you want to call it scientism, as
we're going to come back to that.
Signals of harm and teratogenicity to reassure us that this is probably fine and probably better than untreated depression. I don't care what the science says, honestly. I would never take this medication because I choose, because it feels good, to believe that there is no such thing as a victim and that victim consciousness is the only human pathology. And because I choose to subscribe to that belief system, it must mean that every single dimension, every moment, every aspect of my being is mine.
Hi, welcome to my think tank, a platform developed for lively discussions and debates. Here I bring together friends, colleagues, and experts to delve into some of the most relevant matters of culture, science, and spirituality. The format is a conversation platform. Through deep conversations and consideration of different perspectives and ideas, we aim to broaden our understanding of various topics and tackle some solutions to the challenges facing our world. We hope you will benefit by being on this journey with us as part of our growing community of truth seekers. So without further ado, let's meet today's guest. Kelly Brogan, what a pleasure to have you on my podcast and think tank. I'm so excited to have you here, Dr. Brogan. For those of you that may not recognize Kelly's face, she has been an outspoken voice, especially during the last few years, on so many topics near and dear to my heart. And we're going to get into all of those things. She has a bachelor's degree from MIT in systems neuroscience, as well as she went to medical school as a psychiatrist at Cornell Medical School. And she even practiced as a psychiatrist for 11 years in New York City. And then she decided to kind of go away from all of that. She wrote some pretty awesome books that we're going to talk about as well. One of them is called A Mind of Your Own. That's an important one. Have a mind of your own. The truth about depression and how women can heal their bodies to reclaim their lives. So we're going to talk about so many different topics. I'd like to talk even about things like gender, et cetera. There's so much that I have been thinking about in preparation for this. It is such a pleasure to have you here, Kelly. Thank you.
Oh, what a beautiful introduction. It's really an honor to be here. Thank you.
It's my pleasure. So tell me about your life and how did you get to be? I mean, the first time I saw you, the first word that came to my mind was firecracker.
I told you earlier that's probably on the more euphemistic end of the spectrum of what I often get in response. Yeah, well, that probably comes from, you were probably reading my Irish Italian roots. So I grew up in like a real loudmouth family, and my mom is from Italy. And I think any second generation folks know that you kind of have two options. You can become a doctor or a lawyer, and either way, you better make a lot of money and justify leaving the motherland. So I was really conditioned around a lot of sort of secular hierarchical beliefs and values, right? That there are people at the top who are in power and control. And the closer you can get to that, the safer you'll be. And I went to medical school really, I think, somewhat reflexively. I don't remember having any sort of great inspiration outside of the fact that I worked a suicide hotline at MIT called Nightline. And it's an interesting choice of things to do in my spare time, obviously. But I did, and it was supervised by psychiatrists. And so I was really indoctrinated with this, I don't know, like worldview, this reality framework that said human suffering is a problem that we have to solve, and the solution is, access to pharmaceuticals. And so if I could act as this bridge between human suffering and pharmaceuticals, then I am worthy, right? And what later was revealed to me in even honestly the last couple of years was the extent to which my own physiologic discomfort, the literal sensations in my body when I interact with somebody who's having a hard time, are so intolerable and have been my whole life. Right? I've been running from those sensations, whether they're spontaneously generated from within, or whether they're empathically induced because I'm in the presence of somebody who's struggling, are so intolerable. I have so little capacity. I just don't know how to feel feelings. And that is a big part of why I became a doctor. And I'm not going to speak on behalf of all physicians. However, the altruistic or seemingly altruistic impulse, I think, does derive from a great and perhaps grave intolerance for human suffering, rather than this embrace of it and this nurturance of it and this honoring of it, and fundamentally an acceptance of it, right? So the rejection of what is, the rejection of reality is baked in to allopathic consciousness. And so, I went on to become a psychiatrist, and as a card carrying lifelong feminist, I said, I'm going to help women have better lives. I'm going to get them access to birth control and elective C-sections and the HPV vaccine. And I'm going to make sure that they can take whatever medications they want whenever they want to. And I'm going to justify it through the science. So, I've used science, perhaps you want to call it scientism,
Ooh,
as
we're going to come back to that. That's one of my topics, scientism.
bookmark that. Yeah, as a weapon on both sides of the battlefield. So I have that distinction, right? So I was very interested in the science that defended, so to speak, my right as a prescriber to keep women on Klonopin and lithium and Haldol and you name it during their pregnancies and during breastfeeding. That actually became my specialization. And then as I followed the path of science through, psychoneuroimmunology and learning about the untold adverse effects of these medications, the published research that speaks to so many of the cautionary, potential risks that I never spoke to patients about in an informed consent setting, despite doing my best to provide informed consent. We just literally aren't in a position as conventionally trained doctors to provide informed consent. I followed those pebbles to a whole new paradigm. And the thing is, I was still really angry. And part of the reason is because I was diagnosed with my first health condition, Hashimoto's thyroiditis, postpartum my first pregnancy. And about cognitive dissonance. Obviously, this is a classic case, right? So here I am writing these prescriptions for all these women, specializing in this, blood, sweat, tears, debt, the trauma of, medical training, all the rest. And I am in a position finally to take a prescription for the rest of my life, walk it down to CVS every month kind of a thing. And there was just a huge no in my system. There was no way I was going to become a patient. And that cognitive dissonance, it could have gone in a lot of directions, right? And the direction that it seemed to resolve itself through was a full rejection of my worldview, of my identity, of my training. And it was facilitated by the on paper resolution of what I was only ever told would be a chronic and recidivistic illness, right? So I saw a naturopath. Clearly I was guided, by someone on high, because this was totally out of character for me, except that I didn't want to take the damn prescription, right? So I was motivated to pursue another paradigm because of that. I saw a naturopath, changed my diet, and within the space of 1 year, I watched my antibodies in black and white on paper. I needed that, right? I watched my antibodies, resolve. I watched my TSH come into normal range. And instead of feeling so excited, that I got this get out of jail free card, I was enraged, like primal rage. It was like coursing through my system. I felt the betrayal of, like, the cardinal betrayal even of my childhood, but it was personified through the characters of, me as the doctor and the system, that I had trained with. I felt betrayed. And so I took my sword out of her sheath and I, ran onto the battlefield and published a New York Times bestseller with an exploding pill on the cover. And I waged war for many years against this system in a way that would only reveal itself later to be, informed by a lot of adolescent energy, right? And really now what I call the erotic caress of the enemy. I was totally obsessed by all of the ways that I needed this so-called enemy of industry to change and be the way I thought it should be. And I was going to threaten it with terminal dismantling, should they not comply. Like, I really thought, like, this book and the hundreds of scientific references in it, no one is ever going to take a psychotropic medicine again, right? And of course, I'd be in a lecture hall, in Australia or something, and some lovely woman would come up to me afterward and be like, I loved your book. It was so great. Thank you so much for the work you do. I had such a hard time, and I just really didn't have a choice. And I ended up on Lexapro, and then I was also prescribed Klonopin for sleep. And like, now I don't really know what to do. Okay. So she read my book and she went on to take a medication anyway. So that's when I started to become much more interested in the psychospiritual underpinnings of the behavioral choices that we make around health and the experience of illness and symptoms. And I also at the time met my mentor, Dr. Nicholas Gonzalez, who opened up a spiritual world for me that I'm not sure would have remained, would have been accessible otherwise. And what he showed me was, in 27 years of his clinical practice, that faith was a neuroregenerative state, right? So when he could help his patients access faith in themselves, which now I look, psychologically at that, he helped them to step out of that victim triangle, right? The villain, the victim, the rescuer as the doctor who has all the information you don't have, as the victim who's suffering at the hands of what villain? Yourself, your body, right? Your symptoms. So that war between you and you is an unwinnable war. It's a zero-sum game. And so what I watched him do in his practice, and what he ultimately conferred to me energetically, I believe, is what it is to resolve that fragmentation and to come into alliance with yourself, with the fierce conviction that your body does not make mistakes, that there is no such thing as an illness that needs to be beat into submission and won over, that your symptoms are you telling you about you. Everything is okay. It's more than okay. It's about to get amazing. And so I watched, through this paradigm, when applied to my own practice, like, I've published literal medical history making cases in the literature, and it's not like I'm some sort of shaman. I was able to participate in these cases because I offered permission to my patients to no longer subscribe to their own brokenness narrative, their own victim consciousness. They stepped out of it. Their system went into, a regenerative state, and literally anything they came to me with, lupus, IBS, chronic migraines, I'm not a specialist in any of these areas, obviously. Anything they came to me started to resolve. And so that is, since I would say 2015, that's been really my passion, is what are the ingredients? What is this alchemy, right? That we are working through the human body. What are the ingredients for this kind of expansion and change? And they're not just psychological. They root into not only our emotional histories, but our nervous system capacity to hold intense energies like shame. And so that has led me to, exploring sexuality and sensuality and man-woman relating, and the real hot spots of where shame keeps a lot of our vital force energy arrested. So I guess that's like a little tableau, I guess.
Wow. There's a lot in what you just said. So I'm going to try to go back and unpack certain pieces of that. I think that you and I have some similarities in that we both came from more probably traditional worlds. And, I wasn't the nomadic truth seeker my entire life. I don't think I could really be considered that now, but I was a pharmaceutical CEO. And so here we are. What a funny thing in this day and age to have this kind of conversation between, a former pharmaceutical CEO and, the antithetical Kelly Brogan, right? And I'm sure that they probably had you as a poster child, right? During COVID in particular, with, all the negatives. And I can't even imagine. So when did all of this happen for you, that you started to go down this naturopathic path? And then it was after the birth of your first child, right? That you were going to be forced to be on this long-term chronic medication. So was that while you were still a practicing psychiatrist?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was pregnant, as you mentioned, in my fellowship training, and that's when I was specialized in medicating pregnant women, right? So I had that empathic bridge to my own patients that was unique. And I remember, again, another moment of dissonance where I was writing a Zoloft prescription for a patient, and I was thinking, I don't care how many cases are in whatever pharmaceutically maintained registry of, signals of harm and teratogenicity to reassure us that this is probably fine and probably better than untreated depression. I don't care what the science says, honestly. I would never take this medication as a pregnant woman. And that was a very inconvenient thought, right? Because here I am, very identified with my own virtue and my own goodness as somebody who's serving humanity. And what does that mean? Does that mean I'm doing something wrong? And I didn't know what to do with that. So I just buried it. And yeah, it was about 10 months postpartum that I met that fork in the road. Another ingredient was that I was given the book Anatomy of an Epidemic by a colleague who's a therapist. That book is by investigative journalist Robert Whitaker. And I would have never read that book because I would have just ignored it or dismissed it out of hand. But I did because I already was in the rupture, right? They call it in psychology a rupture of empathy. I already was in this state of recognizing that this system I had vowed my allegiance to perhaps didn't give a shit about me, right? Perhaps couldn't help me and perhaps was never actually here for me now that it's about me and not my patients. And so when I read that book, I put down my prescription pad for good. I never to this day have started a patient on a medication since. And the reason that I did that, and then I dedicated my practice to helping women come off of medications. And the reason that I did that was because of the untold story of the adverse effects of these medications and his hypothesis, which is essentially that medications are responsible for the iatrogenesis we are calling mental health disability the world over, and that it's actually an epidemic of iatrogenesis. It's actually these medications that are inducing disability and chronic so-called mental illness. Because when you look at the non-industry funded literature, what you'll find is that these so-called episodes of so-called mental illness resolve spontaneously and that the outcomes are better through placebo, or non-intervention than they are through these medications. And that coupled with the fact that I was contacted by several grassroots activists, including Kim Witzak and David Carmichael. Kim's husband was started on an antidepressant for work-related stress, and she found him hanging in their garage, dead. And David Carmichael strangled his own 11-year-old son. And I heard, after being started on an antidepressant for run-of-the-mill stress, after I heard these stories, coupled with the literature that I was, unearthing in my rabid search for whatever else I wasn't taught about the lack of efficacy and the adverse effect profile of these medications, not to mention the evidence-based so-called alternative paths to resolving these subjective, honestly, because it's just a list. The DSM is just a list of descriptive terms. There's no diagnostic tests for psychiatry. It's like a Cosmopolitan magazine quiz is like literally the level of scientific validity we're working with. And that is just this stew, right? So this alchemical stew came together, and I said, you know what? There's a better way. And I'm going to figure out what that is. And I found it through my own experience. So the protocol that I operationalized in my practice was literally just what I did to resolve my Hashimoto's. And I said, first, you're going to do this, patient, right? And then we're going to taper your medications. Because when I did it in the opposite order and first started tapering medications, I was literally running an outpatient, rehab. I was shocked at the medical instability that was induced. And that's what's led me to believe that
I'm
psychotropics
sure
are
that a lot of people
so
must have
habit-forming.
also been addicted, right? I mean, it would have been
It's a
hard to
level
get
you
them all
can't
off.
imagine. It's the dependency that is induced by psychotropics so far surpasses anything else. Alcohol, OxyContin, heroin, nothing. There is nothing that you have to taper just to maintain basic medical stability, and it's not even a guarantee. There's no substance that you taper by 1,000th of a milligram, sometimes a month. right? There's nothing like that over years. If you go on these, you go to madinamerica.com or you go on these chat boards or whatever, and you listen to, former patients talk about their process of resolving their dependency on these medications, you would be shocked. When I dedicated myself to this work, I thought if I could just capture video of what some of these women look like, former architects, CEOs, successful women who were put on a medication or two because of a high school breakup 30 years ago, who are now feral animals who can't even cut their nails because the sensation is too intense, who haven't slept in 9 months, who have all sorts of hyper, arousal, dysautonomia symptom. I mean, it is literally the dirty secret of allopathic medicine, what these medications are responsible for. So that's why when you are struggling and you have this victim story that says something is wrong with me, I have this chemical imbalance, you're offered this panacea that's just going to take the edge off. Why would you not do it? Of course you're going to take the med. It makes so much sense. But if you knew that even 2 months on this med could buy you a whole nother trajectory of what it is to be in your body, let alone your heart and your mind, or that you could end up being one of these, patients who ends up impulsively, violently
Yeah.
harming themselves or somebody else, would you still do it? Right. So that's called informed consent. And no one is being offered that because as a prescriber myself, I didn't know that until I started to learn it outside of the system. Now, thankfully, the information, I think for the most part, is getting out there. But, I was wiped off of Google algorithm in 2018, 2019, when I had first page results on these topics. So maybe it isn't that easy to find it. I have to believe that people who need the information are going to have access to it somehow, some way.
So let's, if we could, let's talk about the system for a moment.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that the American Board of Psychiatry and Neuroscience and everything, they probably had a vitriolic sort of reaction after you've been having these more outspoken moments for a while. And then probably that was also, I'm guessing, having come from the pharmaceutical industry. I was not in psychotropics, but as you're talking about this, I'm immediately thinking, wow, psychotropics are going to be a much bigger class action lawsuit than opioids.
Hmm.
And I've had some experience with it myself. Not that I was on it, but I know people that were on it. I know a woman who was on Prestige, and she would have one glass of alcohol and become like homicidal.
Hmm.
And it was really scary. So I can say that, I really believe there's going to be a huge reckoning coming on this. And then what you said about placebo and everything is also resonating deeply within me, because on the other side of looking at these clinical trial results and what we think, and we can easily fool the public into believing, is that there is real science, behind all of this stuff. And actually it's pure scientism
That's right.
in so many cases. I'm not saying that every case is like this, because I know many cases that aren't, but I will say that placebo is by far the best drug that's ever been existent in the world, right? It is what it is, and it doesn't have any side effects. So maybe we should try to figure out how to make placebo really work for everyone, right? In a way.
Absolutely.
And that's kind of what you're talking about with healing within and going within to fix some of these problems that come out in our lives. But how did the system react? How did the board of psychiatry react? How did, the pharmaceutical companies that maybe, you had decent relationships before the turn, how did they all react to you?
Well, I have always had authority issues. Stems from my particular woundology. So I was never really like a model participant, right? Like I was always in the residency director's office in trouble for running my mouth about this or that, even when I was, a card carrying cult member. However, I I was completely and totally ignored. So it was not, I was not, there was no derision. There was nothing. I managed to secure quite a notable book deal for my first book. And so it was like a feature book for top five, publisher HarperCollins. And when they told me that they were going to, I was going to be on Dr. Oz and I was going to be on Nightline and they were going to book all these interviews for me, they gave me media training, all the rest. And I said, these are all pharma subsidized outlets. Like, are they going to be okay with a book with an exploding pill on the cover? How's that going to work? And so they had not had experience with, I guess, like somebody like me. And when we were totally blacklisted, I did not get one single interview that they booked, not one, nothing. And so launch day is coming, and literally, like, the marketing director was crying at the table. I don't think they have ever experienced this. And so my partner actually at the time was really the one who activated like a grassroots network, and we spread the word, and it was so amazing that somehow this ended up on the New York Times. It makes no sense. There's no review in the New York Times. No one has ever mentioned this book in mainstream. So it wasn't until I somehow seemingly arbitrarily made the disinformation dozen list that my name came into any sort of I don't know, mainstream awareness, because I have not encountered, I mean, no one's ever asked me to debate or anything. My colleagues sort of like, took a bow and I went another direction. Like, it's not like I've been in this realm of controversy. So I can't say that I have like suffered at the hands of so much attack or anything like that. And it's really just the subtle, insidious nature of algorithmic censorship that I've experienced. And I can't even say it's like suffering. I've experienced it in many different arenas. Like, first I experienced, I kicked off Facebook and kicked off of PayPal and Venmo and all these things, shadow banned on Instagram, whatever. But it was actually when I lost 100,000 newsletter subscribers in the past 2 years, and not because of my controversial health perspectives, but because of my discussion around topics related to erotica, sexuality, and man woman relating feminism, that I thought, oh, I just enjoy being a provocateur. Like, I'm not a victim of some sort of mainstream oppression or suppression. This is just me, and I must really like this. So what's the problem here? Because it's very easy for a lot of activists to get into the fetishized position of poor me, martyr, obviously. And then the natural energetic extension of that is that they are in in my opinion, the perpetuation of exactly the consciousness they purport to resolve.
Right.
Well, the other time I heard myself say that sentence was about pharmaceuticals. What do pharmaceuticals do? They perpetuate that which they purport to resolve. You take an acid blocker, your rebound reflux is going to be a bitch. Okay. So you take antidepressants. There's an actual term in the medical literature called tardive dysphoria, which means chronic depression, and it is induced by antidepressants. So whenever we imagine we can fight something in this power over domination based, ultimately fear driven psychology and psychospirituality, it is a zero sum game. There is no winning that. And so the resolution of controversy in my own personal life and in my public offerings, if you will, has been really where the work has been for me. When people are like, "Oh, you're so courageous." Like, none of that is courage. That's my wound, right? Like, my activism stems from my wound. My courage has been, to go inside. I call it wearing the villain crown, like recognizing that I am so much of what I judge, and really owning my personal role in the ongoing struggle that I'm experiencing personally, and perhaps even that I'm contributing to, imagining that I'm doing otherwise.
Wow. So it's interesting to kind of watch or listen to the arc of your story, because it has so many parallels to what I also have experienced, where, I wanted to fight the whole healthcare industry. I wanted to battle against it. And I created a whole platform in which to battle against it and to help change it, because I felt like it all needed to be fixed because it was all so broken. And then now to where I am today, which is, well, wait a minute, maybe the reason why it's all so broken is because I keep judging that it's broken, and that just continues to perpetuate the experience I have with it that
Yes.
seems more and more broken.
Yes. Yes.
So,
Exactly.
wait a minute. So that means that I am attracting everything I judge until I learn to stop judging everything I attract.
You develop intimacy with that which is within you
Yes.
that you imagine is the problem outside. When the pandemic started, I had already been enough in this work, right? So I had a leg up on a lot of elements of what unfolded in 2020, right? Whether it was like recognizing the psyop immediately. Of course, I wasn't the only one who did. When you're in this world, you kind of know the scripts and they tell you what they're about to do,
Oh, yeah.
right? They want to play the game with someone, right?
Mhm.
So when it unfolded, after a couple of months, okay, I gave myself a couple of months of indulgent, like, I'm here to blow the whistle. Everybody listen to me. I'm going to tell you what's happening. Okay. And after that, I I got, rolled up my sleeves and I got into the, deep and dirty work of seeing where and how I am holding that know it all, totalitarian, authoritarian energy in my own life that I'm condemning on the outside. And you know what? I found a lot of places. I found a lot of places. I re recorded every single video in my program because I looked at myself and I said, you know what? Like, the energy that I was coming from was this like dark father energy, not mother, father, dark father energy of like, a kind of punishing, threatening, I know better than you, what you should do with your body. I mean, it sounds crazy, right? Because this is my healing program, but it's a subtle energetic signature. I found it there. I found it in telling my daughters to clean their friggin' rooms or eat the last bite of broccoli. I've certainly found it in my romantic relationship at the time. And what it was to clean up my side of the street, my area, my house, and to get to a place in my relationships where I had no grudges, no grievances, no finger pointing, no blame, and an understanding of my role in every single situation, that I wanted to be something unfortunate or something horrific happening to me, has been an ongoing process. I still wake up with this victim alive and kicking. I mean, I'll tell you a funny story. The other day, I got kicked off of a like dating platform that's like kind of Christian oriented. Okay,
Oh,
so
okay. Mhm.
I it and I espouse these values, right? So it's for folks who are interested in, in commitment and are, whatever, traditional man woman relating, like that kind of thing. I was like, that sounds great. Sign me up. And I did. And there were a bunch of people who reported me and I got kicked off. And
Reported you for what exactly?
well, right. So, not for my health beliefs. And in fact, the person who wrote me the email said, we agree with so much of what you stand for publicly. However, you violate our community standards, I guess, around, let's see, profanity, modesty, and promiscuity. And unlike when people, say, how dare you say that there's no such thing as a virus? Like, how dare you talk about, you know, pharmaceuticals this way? How dare you, speak out? People are dying, whatever they say. And home birth is another topic I've like really, erected the lightning rod on. There's so much around that too. So I've been in, that doesn't bother me at all. Literally at all. I have not lost 1 second of sleep about it. I think it's funny and enjoyable, whatever they write on Wikipedia. Like, it doesn't matter. When I made the disinformation dozen, I was like, sweet, I'm going to get some traffic to my website finally, because like it's been real quiet over here. This, however, I was like roiling in shame when I received that email, because this is a deeper layer. It's one thing to believe your brain is broken, your body's broken, your pancreas is stupid, like whatever we believe around, illness. It's another thing to imagine, and psychiatry does this too. It points the finger to your you-ness, right? When you have a mental illness, it's not like, oh, your liver is congested. It's like, no, actually, you're doing you wrong. It's just
Mm.
wrong, right? So
Mhm.
I've never been a psychiatric patient. So this is almost my contact, right? Like, I'm womaning wrong. Something, the decisions that I've made, the way that I've trusted my impulses, the way that I've expressed myself, the way that I've allowed my sexuality to be exposed it's there. Here are the consequences, Kelly. You knew they were coming, and here they are, and you can't take it back, right? It's in the Akashic records of the internet, and I felt a lot of shame. And you would think I would know better at this point, right? Doing this work every day, all day, teaching it, all the things. To just sit with that shame, to talk to the part of me that is so convinced that I did something terminally wrong and I've been exposed for that wrongness, and really be with that part of myself without trying to convert it into the wisdom of, no, you're a whole perfect woman, everything's fine, without doing that. Just be it, just sit in the shit, right? So to speak. And I didn't do that. Right. And instead, I, whipped out a Kelly Brogan special, and I wrote like this scathing email about how wrong they were about all the things, they were doing. And I tried to educate them about the zeitgeist that's underway that they must not know about, and I sent the email. Right? And, listen, it was only a day. I sent an apology email shortly thereafter. But the point is that this victim consciousness, it lives in our incapacity to hold the resonance of these emotional states, because I wouldn't, was unwilling to hold that shame and the sensations of it in my body. I wrote the email. And when I wrote the email, the shame was transmuted into anger. That's a far more elevated, state. It's far more comfortable, right? And then you get to be on the other side, of the dyad. And it feels good for, of course, a moment. So to dedicate ourselves to recognizing that anytime we are pointing our finger and blaming or judging or condemning, it's like actually literally, it sounds trite, but it's actually an opportunity to meet a part of ourselves. So these people help me to meet the part of myself that agrees with them, that I am immodest, profane, and promiscuous. I mean, the promiscuous is a little tough. I've been celibate for a couple of years, but the rest is very possible, right? I agree with them. I have done something wrong. Otherwise, it wouldn't bother me. It would just slide off my back. So when you train, right, when you train as a human in this, training camp that is human relationships and dynamics, there is a way to train that I was very engaged in, which is I will win, I will subdue you. And of course, then I got that handed back to me. I got death threats and aerial photos of my home, in the Northeast in 2016. And now that's not my experience, right? Like now, what's being mirrored back to me is, I mean, the email these people sent me was kind, and I believe in private communities having every right to define the parameters of their membership. Of course, I have a private membership, right? Like, of course, I believe that. So
Sure.
there is just a resolution of controversy. And I can only speak as a woman because I actually have suspected you could tell me whether the imperative is different for men, right? Whether the way to relate to controversy may be different. I certainly want you to be the warrior, right? It's not my role because it's easy for me and it comes from an old place. I mean, even astrologically, right? Like my South node is in Aries. Like I came in here already knowing, how to do that. And so when it's easiest to pull my sword, I know it's time to sheath it, right? Like I know it's time to put it back in. And that's vulnerability for me. For another woman, it might be the opposite, right? Like speaking her truth, like opening that throat chakra might be how she meets the part of herself that has been shamed into submission, which is the part that actually says the unsaid thing. It's different for each of us, but leaning into the uncommon response for ourselves, I think it's enough of a practice. Like, how can I be so sure I know what this world is supposed to look like? I don't know, right? I can't be so sure that somebody is not supposed to take 800 psychotropics. It's not even my business, right? So if I stay in my own lane, the place that I speak from is very different than if I imagine I'm here to save the world and do good things for other people while my inner world is like a mess, right? And I would say that's true for the majority of activists I know. Their relationships are a mess, their lives are a mess, they're angry and they're miserable, right? You want those people telling you how the world should be, right? They don't even know themselves, let alone, what utopia is like.
Whoa, you're spewing out so many amazing topics, and I want to come back to the disinformation dozen thing. Um, I saw that in the Wikipedia article on you, that you were named among the top 12 people as outspoken against vaccine and COVID and the pandemic and all of that. Um, how did you feel when they named that? I mean, you mentioned already, oh, it's going to give you a lot of like website traffic and stuff like that. But how did that make you feel? And then we'll come back to the topic you said earlier, right? And then maybe compare and contrast that with how men might feel in a similar situation.
Mm, yeah.
Um, but so, how did you feel when you first got that disinformation dozen moniker?
Well, I have been speaking out about vaccination I had been for about 10 years prior. Um, However, I had already undergone this transition, like into inner work and inner, psychology and the victim triangle, and, really developing a curiosity around what makes somebody ready to change. I mean, I was already kind of moving out of that space when 2020 hit. So I was pretty confused how and why I made that list, because I was certainly, and I mean, I could name 10 friends of mine who were spouting their mouths way more radically than I was. And the only thing, that I really felt and feel passionately about is, the resolution of the consciousness that underpins germ theory. As, of course, a former germ theorist, I have seen how this is one of the very powerful ways that the elements of victim consciousness, chiefly the rescuer caretaker impulse, right? The virtue signaling that says, I must do this for the greater good. It's where compliance and obedience lies. And it is where the triangulation against the body through the recruitment of a villain, which is an invisible particle, actually originates. It is so foundational to the consciousness of allopathy, what germ theory is, that I've really interested myself in it. And I see the same patterns, whether we're talking about, sexual shame or, fear of the flu. It's the same consciousness, it's the same psychology. So I did run my mouth a bit about that from the beginning, show me the evidence kind of a thing,
Hmm.
when it comes to this virus or any virus. And so I can understand how, I might have stood out in that way. But I really think that I became sort of like a pet, um, I don't know, like target of certain folks who, they are even talk about me on their podcast all the time. It's like, on the playground when the boy has like a crush on the little girl and he's like tugging her braids and teasing her and pushing her. And so it has that sort of feeling. So I was like, okay, well, maybe they contributed to my involvement. Maybe my association with my former partner Sayer was part of it. I don't know, but I actually really kind of liked it. And that was the beginning of it, the same way I kind of like being blacklisted, the same way I kind of even like telling you about it, right? Like there is my colleague and friend, I don't know, ally, Carolyn Elliott. She just changed her name to Carolyn Lovewell. But anyway, she wrote a book called Existential Kink. And it
Hmm.
really helped me put a phrase to what I was already becoming uncomfortably aware of, which is that I actually enjoy my problems. I enjoy my
Ah.
struggles. And it actually feels good in my body when I re-encounter familiar struggles, whether that's disappointment with men, uh, or resentment, or whether it's this sense of being like punished for being a bad girl, right? And how that was my whole career, was like, how much can I get their attention, right, for being a bad girl? And I was aware that I enjoyed making that list. It was fun for me. And I was, contrasted by the response. Like all the rest of the 11 folks were like rallying together for a lawsuit. And I was like, guys, I'm good. I'm going to go dancing actually. And the experience helped me to see that I can choose to play this game in victim consciousness, or I can, I don't know, step out of it in a surprising plot twist, which is like, I don't mind, right? And I'm not scared, right? There's no punishment or consequence actually coming. So thanks for the attention, right? And it really didn't bother me and doesn't bother me. And even the censorship I've come to understand. Like, I mean, I had the most successful year of my business last year in my entire career, the most censored I've ever been, again, for many reasons. So, like, what's the problem? Right? Like, what actually is the problem? Unless I want to generate one because I enjoy having one, you know?
Interesting. So, okay, let's go back to that for a moment. The enjoyment of having one. And I like the way you use the term womaning, which is like you've turned this gender of woman into a gerund, right? So, um, what gender into gerund? Ooh, that's kind of
It's good.
sounds like
It's
a
like a
book
book
title,
title.
doesn't it?
Yes, exactly. Both of our wheels turning.
That's right. So, tell me about that. This whole, do you believe that maybe the struggles that you face and you have faced, like the one you just described, um, were because that's what you, at some dark subconscious level, wanted to experience and learn to transmute through?
Absolutely. Every single one of them. That's my belief anyway, because I choose, because it feels good, to believe that there is no such thing as a victim and that victim consciousness is the only human pathology. And because I choose to subscribe to that belief system, it must mean that every single dimension, every moment, every aspect of my being is mine, right? It's mine to own. And that radical responsibility is exquisitely uncomfortable when I'm upset about anything, right? So I just told you things that don't upset me. Guess what? There are plenty of things that upset me all the time. And if it's a training, right? It's a training of my system, the same way, I might condition my body to be able to do an invert on the pole, right? Is a training of my system to meet that feeling of upset, which in this somatic experiencing world is called your somatic sequence, right? Like, you probably know this. So like, my chest fills with energy, and then I get heat up my neck and then under my arms, and then I feel this like wave come over me of like, that can only be subdued through action, right? Like, I have to do something immediately. So that somatic sequence I now recognize. Sometimes I can meet it with curiosity and say, like, what's here for me? What's going on here?
Mhm.
Right. Sometimes I fail to do that, like I told you with that email that I sent. Um, so the experience of being myself in this body has required that I learn how to expand my capacity to hold the energies of my emotions. And it's not just the tough ones. I mean, I have worked with a coach for years, Whitney, and what she has helped me to do is to expand my capacity to actually hold pleasure and sensation that would otherwise be described as enjoyable in my body, right? So, like, this is the difference between self-pleasuring and like putting an orgasm on myself, right, which is almost like rapey energy, unconscious, if you will, masculine energy, immature energy, bringing that into like, what is it that you want in this moment, body? Right? Like, how can I serve you, body? It doesn't matter how it looks or if it follows the Masters and Johnson, like, arc of bases, right? So that process has been a multi-year process of coming into allegiance and alliance with my own body. And unless that is undertaken at the same time that we are identifying our boundaries when it comes to sovereignty, that we're just going to get trapped in it's just going to take another form, right? So this broad spectrum experience of, embodied awareness has really taken, precedent over my activism in so many ways. And it's been difficult to lose relevance, to
Yeah.
feel like I've lost a
Mhm.
lot of relevance. People don't come to my Telegram channel to learn about what's going on in the world, right? They used to. um, they might come to my channel to learn what to do with the shame that's keeping them in this experience of living behind a glass wall in half a life, right? But that's not a newsfeed kind of a thing. So the identity transition, I am sure you can relate, is something that requires a certain amount of system capacity to hold the imagined consequences. I like to say that every initiation is like you lose something you imagine you would die
Yeah.
without: the
Yeah.
partner, the job, the credential, the title. Even leaving New York was that for me. It's like, I can't be not a New Yorker. I'm going to
Yeah.
live in Florida.
Hmm.
What? So it's really recognizing, yeah, the signature of these kinds of expansion opportunities helps a lot, because then when
Interesting.
you encounter it, you just orient again. You're like, oh no, I'm here at this same kind of initiation again. It's gonna be
You know
it's
what?
gonna be good.
You know what it makes me think of, Kelly? It's fascinating. You're tapping into something that I've been thinking a lot about lately. And it's that, from the time that we start experiencing shame as children, it
Yes.
reminds me of the Bible story where God comes and says, Adam, what did you do? And he said, oh, the woman that you gave me and commanded I should remain with her, she gave me of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and I ate it. And Eve, what did you do? The serpent beguiled me, and I ate it. So we immediately transmute, because it's uncomfortable, the feelings of shame into blame,
Yes.
right? And that's a very rapid thing. We all do it, right? And I think as we age and as we become more spiritual, as we ascend in our consciousness, that starts to unravel with time, where we no longer feel the need to immediately project it off into blame. We may still do it from time to time because there's still some reflexes that we have psychologically. But the hero, everyone believes they're a hero in their own story. I'm a big fan of the hero's journey story and I've seen that arc in my whole life, because this is the archetype of all stories throughout all of mankind's history. And what's fascinating to me is that we create our personas based on what we decide not to be, how we
Mhm.
do not want to be projected, how we do not want to be perceived. We're the only ones that can't see those aspects that are still us, because we don't have eyes in the back of our head. We don't have them on the side
That's
of our
right.
heads either. So we can't see 360 of ourselves.
That's right.
So what happens is the hero gets formed by defining the villain. The villain must exist for the hero to build his or her persona. And then at a certain point, when the hero finally goes through a spiritual awakening, then they have to ask themselves the question, who am I if there's no villain?
Yes.
Because the villain was helping me define the boundary of who I am.
Hmm.
And that separation is something I could easily portray and articulate. Do you think that a lot of heroes today are going through this realization that maybe they're the source of some of the villains just by their own thoughts?
Oh, I love having this conversation with you, because no, I don't think a lot of people are thinking this. That's why I get paid the big bucks to go talk about this on stages, because it's like a revelation. Like, these are not my ideas. I don't think I've ever had an original idea. So it's just applying exactly what you described to the mission driven experience that the average light being, here to save the world, freedom fighting activist is up to. And I'm not saying they shouldn't be doing that. Everyone should do themselves, right? Do what you're doing. It's fantastic. There's a role for everyone. However, there is this moment. I mean, this is Jungian, right? This is the individuation arc. There is this moment where you have an opportunity to experience freedom, right? To experience sovereignty, to experience what is on the other side of childhood and child psychology. And it's exactly what you described. The villain, I look through the, parental family of origin lens. That is the individuation from your parents, right? Who am I if not, in contradistinction to my mom? Who am I, if not in rejection of my father? Who am I if I am in merger with them, right? So finding how it is that you can integrate all that you've rejected and idealized about your parents into yourself, and then to step into this non-oppositional, non-referential place, and non-devotional, honestly, this place of simply honoring. I'm a huge fan of family constellation. Simply honoring the gift of your life, right? And the order that constellates the power of your lineage. that's called being an adult. And the opportunities to step into that can only be seized when you recognize them, right? Because if you imagine that as the hero, your becoming is through, subduing, eliminating, and making irrelevant the enemy. I mean, think about what if all of the activists fighting for health freedom, we don't even really know what that looks like, but let's say we all were right, right? It's like the
Hmm.
Schadenfreude of activism. I
Hmm.
still enjoy it today. I mean, this is uncomfortable to admit publicly, however, I
The
will.
Schadenfreude, for
Yeah.
people that may not know the
Oh,
term, it just means gaining and deriving joy from another person's loss or failure.
yes. It's like the Marquis de Sade, like, yeah, the
Hmm.
origins of that sadistic impulse, right? So I will have somebody in my life who will, let's say have a medicalized birth. And there will be some part of me that actually wants something to go wrong so that what? I can be right. You know,
Yeah.
the deliciousness of that right is the actual sadistic impulse that lives in all of us. It's the sadistic impulse that is in the teacher, and her students, in the priest with his congregation, to acknowledge that these energies move through us and own them and recognize when we are in that, that place of working with our righteousness that requires somebody else serve our righteousness without consent. That's dark, right? That's dark. And I don't know a single activist, if they're really honest with themselves, who wouldn't say that they kind of want to be right about how fucked up everything is, right? And so when it turns out to be right, they enjoy that. Well, what is that? Right? Like what are we actually accomplishing and achieving here? And that's why, one of the places I chose to put my energy in 2020 was into this rally. So we did this thank you body rally, and it was meant to be disruptive because in 100, no, it's like 186, I was like so many locations, all of these folks got together and they made signs about the ways in which they have healed in radical contexts that defy the dogma of what was offered to them through the allopathic system. And so it's this concept of like, when you don't have a connection to what it is that you're fighting for, but when you do have a connection to what it is that you're fighting for, you're not fighting anymore. Right? It's like the fight is over, because then you just enjoy it because it's already here. It's
Mm.
already here. And what we imagine is only available after something occurs is always an illusion, right? There are things I imagine are only available to me through a partner. It's not true. It's not true. I can access so many threads of that energy in the here and now. And that's empowerment. Otherwise, we're dependent and helpless. And either that's an illusion or that's reality. I choose to believe it's an illusion.
Wow. Okay. So this really brings me to where I feel like we are in the world today to a certain extent, because I think we've been through this long arc of exploring the exploration of suffering. And I believe, after a lot of thinking on this topic, that all suffering is derived from judgment.
Mm,
And that if we can transcend judgment, we live in a world that's based entirely on judgment. We live in a world that is based entirely on dualistic, decisions. It's either or. It's not. It's very seldom we can actually make and decisions, right? And replace the either ors. And so we live in this world where we believe, being born into it, that we have to be judged ultimately by ourselves and others based on our ability to discern and make good decisions and make good, refined judgments. And I just don't believe, after 54 years on this planet Earth, that the reason why we're here is to become better judges.
mm,
I believe that we're here so that we can learn to transcend the judgment and learn to embrace love
mm,
and learn to receive it and learn to give it. And that sounds like such an easy thing, like know thyself, Socrates said, but it's actually the hardest thing we'll ever do. But when the hero finally realizes that the villain and the villainry exists because the hero needs to recognize his own boundary of who he is, and it's built on a sand castle, And even the notion of separation is built on a sandcastle. And so what starts to happen then is the hero is faced with this choice. Who am I without a villain? And while we've been exploring this notion of suffering, maybe is it possible to explore the notion of bliss?
Mm.
If we can learn to still be comfortable with who we are, not hate ourselves as a hero, recognize we can still be a hero without a villain. The hero does not need a villain. And I think that's how we could enter into an entirely new world in existence.
That's beautiful. It's beautiful. And I think the only like subtle personalization I would offer from my own experience is that I'm not sure I would, or maybe it's because I've never experienced it, um, in sober life, I would use the word transcend when it comes to judgment, because in my experience, it's almost like a descent into it, right? It's like when I experience judgment of another, I am encountering, from my perspective, either a limited permission field, right? So a woman who is, let's say 3 years ago, I would have judged a woman who was like scantily clad on Instagram. And that would have been because I myself did not have or feel I had permission to be that woman without consequence or punishment, right? So I don't have permission. Or sometimes I judge someone, like, let's say I judge somebody for being slow and incompetent, which is a big one for me, right? So let's say I judge, like, I have so little tolerance for people's incompetence, right? So let's say I judge somebody for that. Well, right now in this moment and in all historical moments, like, I have had a part of me that is thoroughly incompetent. And actually, that part of me holds a lot of my feminine energy that would be open to receiving help. Right. So it's like whenever you are in judgment and rejection, there's like a gifted dimension of yourself that you don't get to access. Right. So if I am in judgment, it's either because somebody is being something I was raised to believe I can't be and I want to be, or because I am in rejection of a part of myself that I have not developed awareness of. So that judgment portal is massive. I mean, that's an entire religion, like that could
Oh,
be
yeah.
the entire thing you practice and nothing else. Is every time I
Mhm.
feel that judging, blaming, condemning finger, um, I'm meeting myself and I have the opportunity to expand. And what happens when somebody else judges me? Well, like I said, if it bothers me, how can I own it? How can I try it on? You know, I tried on. Am I profane? Yeah, I've been pretty well behaved this podcast, but I have a serious, serious
You
potty
haven't
mouth.
thrown
Okay.
any F bombs yet.
I'm from New Jersey. You can't take the Jersey out of the girl. So yeah, that's true. Okay. That's accurate, right? Am I immodest? Yeah. Yeah, especially these days. Okay, that's true too. So when you try it on, there is an experience. It's like the piss comes out of it. It's like, oh, it's true. And that actually becomes, on some level, at some point, fun. It's like, yeah, it's like I am all the things. Yeah. And then the controversy is immediately over, right? The battle is immediately over, and the empowered person is the one who was seemingly being judged. So a lot of what I have focused on in these years is the reclamation of choice, right? And so I like to think of, like, discernment, this spiritual trope of like discernment is judgment plus choice, right? So if I am judging or being judged, I have this experience of like, this feels bad, because either I'm being something people don't want me to be, or people are being something I don't want them to be. Then where does my choice lie? You can't access that when you're in that very eroticized, actually, energetic dynamic of controversy. You don't even see that you have choices because all of your energy is vectorized towards being right and winning. Your choices emerge when you own your shit and you come to this place of interacting with the upset. I call it entering through the upset. You come to this place of interacting with it with curiosity. And it's very, actually, it's like a sport, becomes almost a sport, and one that you can become better and better at. Then you see your choices. oh, actually, I can just go over there. Oh, actually, I don't have to talk to this person. Oh, actually, I can start my own homeschool pod. Oh, actually, I can, move to this country. The choices begin to expose themselves where previously you wouldn't even have perceived that you didn't know you had a choice, right? It's like missing is any sense that something's missing. And so that experience, I think, is one of the cardinal aspects of coming into sovereignty, awakening, spiritual expansion, is the relationship to choice that we've always had, but we imagined that, we didn't.
I think it's connected to the word you used of Schadenfreude. And the reason I see a connection there, and I agree with everything you just said. The reason I see the connection with Schadenfreude, though, is that judgment versus discernment. Um, it's probably the time I think I realized what the difference was for myself was when I realized that I no longer needed to be right, and that was less important to me than coming to the right answer. And the right
Mm.
answer for me was usually tied to what my intentionality and my connection to my own higher life purpose and higher self was. But this transcendence of being right and moving to this new zone of coming to right answers was a massive shift for me in everything, in relationships, in life and work and business. I didn't need to be right anymore.
Oh, it's everything. In relationship, that is everything. That is the difference between a dysfunctional relationship and a healthy one, is when you're on the same team as your partner and you are co-divining solutions, right? Like you said, you're co-divining that right answer versus being in that victim triangulation. It just is the death knell of
It's
any
it's it's
connection.
really was for me about kind of coming to the realization that the relationship is more important to me than who's right or wrong.
Yeah.
And that, and because if you don't transcend that, you get stuck in a life of Schadenfreude, and that's not a very fun life.
It's so true. It's
Right.
really
And
true.
I do believe, though, that we're at this stage now. You talk a lot about masculine and feminine, and I really want to talk about that, and also want to talk about, as you've kind of gone through this whole transcendence, I guess, and transition throughout your life. Free
Sounds like I had
speech.
a big sex change.
No, no, that would definitely be gender to gerund, but no.
It's major transition, yes.
But you know what I realized? I came to this realization just a few weeks ago. I was in Europe, and I was thinking to myself, why is it now that the world seems to be so like all encompassed in this in this discussion about gender, and why is the world so enthralled, I guess, with these topics of pedophilia? Why are the discussion topics so oriented right now around like corrupt governance and government? And I realized the reason why I'm experiencing that world because it's my own U inverse.
Mm.
I tend to think that we live in, I look at it mathematically. It's like I'm a number and the rest of the universe around me is one over my number as a reciprocal. And so it's reflecting back to me in a pattern, just as with any prime number, you're going to end up with a number that has a period of repetition. So it'll literally have a repetitive cycle in it, like samsara. So I look at it now, and everything I look at, I say to myself, why did I choose this? What is it about me that's unresolved that I'm still getting so triggered by the aspects of the outside world? So if the world around me is the sum of my judgments that I'm still harboring, that I'm largely unconscious of, then how can I put it into the conscious mind? So I started writing down all the things I still harbored deep, deep
Mm.
judgment for, right?
Mm.
And triggers. And the list I had was pedophilia,
Mhm.
right? That was one of the things that I was just like, how could you ever, like literally, I have such a trigger response to that. I have no issue with homosexuality, or but the topic of in public schools kind of pressing it down on children that they should be making decisions about their gender on their own when they're like as early as 3 years old. That's a discussion in California, is just incensing to me, right? So I started realizing, and then I've always not liked corrupt government. So then when I found out that now there's all kinds of on C-SPAN, you just watch it on C-SPAN, congressional hearings going on right now about the government's complicit role in sex trafficking. It's almost like they're all conflating, right? These things that I've been judging are all conflating to form new hydras, right? With these multiple heads of perniciousness. and nefariousness, right? I'm like, what the hell is this? And at some point, I had to realize that it's because of what I'm continuing to harbor. It's not outside of me. It's just a reflection of what's still inside of me and is yet unconscious, as you mentioned, the individuation path with Carl Jung. So that's been a big epiphany for me. And yet still, we have this big theme going on in society right now around gender. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this and the role of the beautiful divine nature of divine masculine and divine feminine, and where you see this evolving too.
I mean, this could be a weekend workshop. It's such an important topic. And I don't pretend to be any sort of expert on it, other than that I've found myself just organically through this process that we've been discussing and exploring, right in the center of the question: what is a man and what is a woman? Right? What is it to be a woman? What is it to be a man? And I have not given any of my life force energy to most of the psyops that have unfolded, I would say, in the past 2 years. I've just unsubscribed, like opted out. So none of it really is upsetting to me, even though, of course, fundamentally, I agree with every single thing you said, right? Like, of course, I could get my panties like real in a bunch about this stuff. And I just am not giving it my energy, also because I have given so much of my energy to the universal child, to the anonymous victim. And it actually has harmed my own children, right? So I spent so many years as a vaccine activist, imagining that I am here to make the world right for the child who might be vaccinated by an ignorant parent or by, a coercive, institution or whatever it is. And meanwhile, like, I'm going to be repairing with my children till kingdom come because of how much energy I devoted. So that rescuer is a place that my victim consciousness lives. So when I imagine it's my job to save, the 3-year-old from sex reassignment surgery at the hands of their parents, I mean, certainly that makes sense, right? Of course, that's horrific, right? This is like not only a boon for the pharmaceutical industry, don't forget that, lifelong client and customer that has been awarded them, but it is a perversion and an inversion of the most, sacred dimension of our biology, which is our inborn polarity. And I'm not going to take the bait. Okay. I'm not taking the bait because I don't know that. If that person is my best friend, that's a different thing. I don't know this person who's making, Newsweek headlines or whatever it is. So that's sort of like, I guess, a general caveat. However, as I have explored, the ways in which my activism has been driven by a lot of shadowy material, one of the things that I found under there is a fear that I have of men, period. And specifically, a fear that I have that I will be killed by a man, and specifically by a powerful authority, right? By a man in a position of power. And even more specifically, for my energy, for my radiance, for my self expression, right? So the fact that I found that lying underneath, it covertly pulling the strings of all of my activism against the capital T, capital M man, right? Because I call it like mommy medicine, daddy government. And I left the medicine battle like a while. It's like boring, right? And where I landed was like, there's a bigger war here, right? And this is infrastructural, right? This is the technocracy. This is the, elites. And right, this is a many, many layers to the deception. I mean, literally everything I've ever learned was a lie. Okay. And I can keep it coming, right? Because there's no question I'm unwilling to entertain at this point. But what I found underneath it, underneath this warfare really that I was engaged in, was the fundamental biological reality that if you were standing here in front of me and you wanted to put your hands around my neck, you could kill me in minutes. And there's really not much I could do about it unless I was like really crafty, which I'm not when it comes to self-defense. Okay. So I walk the earth with that biological reality
Mhm.
that you could kill me and I probably couldn't kill you. Okay. And that is informing everything I do, everything I do, especially when it's unconscious, right? So when I became interested in ending the war with men, I have a podcast on this subject, right? So when I became interested in ending the war with men, I found that the resentment and the bitterness and the rage that I felt, and that also was at the core of my feminism, my so called feminism, which really was up until that point, like a righteous bitch blaming, indicting, condemning, you better be cowering in apology, right? While I do what you can do bleeding. I mean, that was like really like where I arrived. And it was totally dismantled by my commitment to end this war so that I could end it within myself, right? Because the truth is that toxic father I imagine is out there is exactly the simulacrum lives in me. I father myself that way. And you better believe that is how I have treated myself. I did a water fast last year for 9 days because a male friend of mine inspired me. And it was like the end of an era for Kelly Brogan. I'm still recovering from it a year later, right? So there was a way that I related to myself that was like, don't be a fucking pussy, Kelly. Get it together. Get your shit done, right? Like I would not consciously, obviously, but I would treat myself like an
I'm glad you
abusive
finally threw the F
father.
bomb out. You got it out there. You had to get one.
Well, I'm on your censorship-free platform, so it's
That's right. That's exactly right.
that I was treating myself, I was husbanding myself that way. So, the dynamics that I would attract in my life, of course, would mirror that back. So it was really motivated by an interest in coming into harmony within myself. And I thought, okay, I'm going to practice with the men of the world. Here's how I'm going to practice. I'm going to no longer talk shit about men, period. We do this for entertainment as women, right? My teacher Omrapani says is like henpecking, right? Like we get together as women and it's a sport that we cut you all down, right? Like it's actually what we do. Women complain about their husbands, about their fathers, about their brothers, about the guy mowing their lawn, okay? It's what we do. I decided I'm not doing that any longer, and that I would commit myself to showing men authentic appreciation and respect.
Wow.
And part of the reason that that was scary was because I had coupled my sexual energy with any sort of appreciation, or like any kind of offering to a man, right? So I would like pinch that off, right? Because I didn't want to offer my sexual energy to just anyone. And the segregating of these energies, like right, my heart energy, my esteem center, my solar plexus from my lower chakras was a project, right? To come into a place where my landscaper downstairs does a beautiful job planting a tree, and I can look him in the eyes and say, that is so amazing that you did that. It looks incredible. Thank you so much. Right. And really showing him respect for his actions. That creates a safer world for me, because I believe that men not only deserve respect, they require it. And when they are not offered it by the women of the world, then they cannot fulfill their contract, which is to protect, right? To protect and serve the women and the children and the other men of the world, right? So what is the most powerful way you can render a populace vulnerable to control? It is to fundamentally dismantle the man-woman dyad. And it's not just erotic, it's just in everyday life, how we relate across these discrete binary genders, okay? And it is most amplified as a technology in the erotic dyad, right? So a man and a woman who are in agreement, right? Who are in their complementary energies, who are running that microcosmic circuit between them at all times, because, there are many different ways of describing the exchange, but she's offering her enthusiasm and her respect and admiration, and he's offering his containment of her system, right? His safety, his protection. I have come to believe that if women of the world were properly contained by the men in their life, meaning offered the stability of their masculine run systems, the entire world would change in a day. That is all it takes, because we are very dangerous, okay, as women, when we are uncontained, when we are scared, when we are flailing, when we are grasping at straws of safety, we make a mess of shit, okay? And, my daughter's boyfriend asked me the other day, he's like, do you think it's harder to be a man or a woman today? Unequivocally, it is more difficult for men. The lack of initiation that you suffer, we don't require, we have childbirth. I'm a champion for natural childbirth for this reason. However, we don't require initiation to womanhood in the same way that I believe men do. You have to die and then be reborn into your manhood. It is something you make, it's something you claim, from my understanding, from my observation. And how do we offer this to boys? We sit them in a classroom with a woman yapping at them 40 hours a week, making sure like they raise their hand to go pee and making sure their body isn't doing anything, too inappropriate. And that is how we make a man. We send them to school. This is a problem, right? This is a problem. And the people who are suffering are the men, but the women, really. And then we are, raising sons. We are castrating them because we're scared of them, right? Figuratively, energetically, spiritually. And we are rendering yet another generation of men into man children, right? Like a man boys. And then another generation of unfulfilled, scared, and flailing women. So we can undo this. We can undo this right now. But I only know the work that women can do, right? Like, I don't know what men can do. My sense is, especially from the work of Laura Doyle, who wrote a book called The Surrendered Wife and The Empowered Wife. My sense is that when women get in their lanes, when they commit to sealing, their lips, and they don't tell a man how to man better, right? They let him fail. They let him do his thing, and they show appreciation when he serves, when he, provides, when he protects, that men come into their natural expression. They don't need to be taught how to feel their feelings. I think you probably know how to feel. Your heart is intact. It's that you've been so run a psychological operation of epic proportions that has probably left you, and most men, I don't know about you, but most men feeling really confused. Am I supposed to be sensitive and in my feelings, this whole new age agenda? Or am I supposed to be apologizing? Or am I supposed to be a man, right? If a man showed up in most of our lives as women, we would be fucking terrified. Like, we would have no idea what to do with that, because it hasn't been modeled, right? What a heart connected, heart open man in his predatory energy, there to, right? Like Omrapani calls it, like the monster who's there to defend you, right? Like, that's what we want natively. We will never not want that. I will never be convinced that there's a woman alive who does not want that. And I'm not talking about you want to have sex with that. I'm talking about that we need this. This is the fabric of society that has been unraveled with this current agenda that imagines it's not relevant, whether you're a man or a woman or who you're relating to. It is exceedingly relevant, because polarity is the nature of the dimension that we are in. And if you don't know what pole you're occupying, you're lost.
Whoa, that's fascinating. I think I said wow after every one of your,
Tirade.
really, really amazing and profound. And that also makes me think about, this notion of this heart connected man, and what a role, what the world would be like if we actually had men that it was okay to be men. For myself, I didn't feel like I was a grown man until I was about 44.
Mm.
And I think a lot of people suffer from this, in that it wasn't that I wasn't successful and I wasn't in occupying big leadership positions. I think I was the youngest CEO of a publicly traded healthcare company when I was 32.
Wow.
So I was already like, I'd already kind of checked my boxes and said, okay, I can be a man now, but I didn't feel yet like I had accomplished everything that I still set out to before I considered, okay, I've made it through my rite of passage. right? And I'd taken big risks, and I had done, a lot, been responsible for a lot all over the world. And I think what shifted in me was realizing one day, and I think, first of all, women are a lot more mature than men. I think women start to mature a lot in their late 20s and early 30s, where men kind of go in this no man's land. And that's where we have to go into a sort of rite of passage. We
Right.
have to go and figure out, can we survive in this world? Are we going to be a victor, or are we going to be a victim? And so, and as soon as you decide to take on that mantle of victimhood, then everything starts to look like you're getting victimized,
Mhm.
because you're the hammer searching for the nail of victimhood.
Exactly.
And so I think overcoming the tendencies that society has to pull us towards that is what it really means to become a man in today's world. Being able to define and understand what's important to the man, and also take responsibility. I didn't ever understand in love relationships that what my partners wanted was not the same thing that I wanted. I mean, not even closely the same thing, right? It was like radically opposed in a way. One was, for me, I wanted to be loved because I felt like I had been missing that, because I had had so much, conditional love growing up with a tiger mom who's like, oh, you got all A's and one A minus. Next time, if you get all A's, then I'll really love you, right? That type of stuff. And it's kind of like the classroom you described in a way, right? So then that leaves men in this weird position where we're always seeking the acceptance,
Yeah.
right, of the women in their lives. But then what is it that the woman wants? We think that they want the same thing. The woman doesn't want the same thing. The woman wants safety. The woman wants containment. It took me a really long time to understand that. And the woman wants evolution. The man wants everything to stay the same.
Yes.
When I've talked to men and women that have gotten divorced, I ask them, what was it? Why'd you get divorced? When I knew you, when you guys fell in love, what happened? And the woman says, you know what? He never grew up. He was still playing video games. He never evolved into the man I thought he was going to become. And the man says, she totally changed. She used to like to have sex all the time. She used to like to go to football games. She used to like to do all these things. And she changed and she evolved into something that I don't want to be married to anymore. So immediately, right from the very beginning, the expectations were off. His expectation that she would remain looking like the exact same way she did when she was 22 years old was a devastating disappointment. And for her, the disappointment was that he never grew up into the man that she had expected him to become. I think there's something very profound in this, and that we can become better men when we understand what the woman and the feminine, the divine feminine, actually needs and wants.
Yeah, I mean,
And
what you described is the mother-son dyad, right? Like that is a highly unerotic space, doomed,
yeah.
right, for divergence.
So then how do you transmute all of this into, sort of all your discussion about sexuality? So gender is one topic, and understanding the roles and the mutual expectations in relationship and partnering. But moving that into this realm of the erotic and sort of, and I teach this as well. I teach it on Gaia. There's a program for Gaia Plus members called the Divine Encryption, where I teach sex magic.
Ooh.
And yeah, I love, first of all, two words that should be conflated, I think. Um, right. So the question I have for you is, tell me about your journey into sort of this realm of exploring the erotic and what that
Mm,
means.
yeah. It has a very similar architecture to all of the other sovereign paths, right? Out of conventional finance, education, food and agriculture, health and medicine, where coming into alliance with my own needs and desires requires that I know myself to some extent and have an interest in what is going on inside of me. And the tools that help me to do that, right, to understand what it is that I actually want, so that I can express it so that I can exercise my power of choice and engage in true consent, right? So I would say the vast majority of us who are engaged in eroticized dynamics, there's no actual consent, clarity, expression of needs. It's just nobody even talks about really exploring sex deeply until there's a problem. And that's part of what drew me to the BDSM community and the way that, for many years, people have been practicing the high art of consensual hierarchy and consensual domination and submission. And what comes through these spaces when you elect to occupy a polarity. And you do so because you know that there is turn on available through that polarity for you, and you understand the rules of engagement. You have consensually communicated and you have agreed to serve each other in this way. Uh, so that also Betty Martin's work. She teaches what's called the Wheel of Consent, which helped me to see that I was just like so many in this performative sexuality of like, oh, I'm giving sex to him, and he's in. Probably most of the time, men are also in performative sexuality, imagining they're giving sex to their partner, and no one's actually receiving. Nobody actually has any idea what's wanted or whether it's being fulfilled. So when you understand, that I can touch your arm, and I can give you an experience of pleasurable touch as I touch your arm, or I can touch your arm because I want to feel what your arm feels like. That's called taking touch. And taking touch is a shame space, right? It's a
Yeah.
shame
Hmm.
walled dimension of our predatory dark eros, right? For man and for woman. And so to own what it is that you want, to recognize that sometimes you want to take that touch from somebody else, the way I do with my cat, right? I take touch from my cat. My cat doesn't ask me to pet him. I pet him because I like the feeling, right? Of petting him, right? But we lose that concept, and we imagine that we're giving when we're actually taking, we're offering when we're actually asking. And the mix of all of this is really organized in BDSM practice, in conscious kink, in Kasia Urbaniak's work. She wrote an incredible book called Unbound, where she helps women to learn how to ask from either submissive energy or from dominant energy, to really get a sense of like, what does it feel like in my body when I am in one polarity or the other? And how can I occupy and intend towards one of those lanes intentionally, like consciously, right? Willfully. And then I would say Jaya's work helped me a lot, because she has something called the erotic blueprints. And it's basically like love languages for sexuality and for sexual preferences. And I spent months of my life like running a fork over my left leg or a feather over my right leg, and seeing like, what do I actually like? Right? What actually feels good? What is the experience of my own body map? I'm in my mid 40s. Like, where have I been? Like, this should be, I have taught my daughters this. Like, this should be taught, you know, in tweenhood. And the fact that it's not means that we're really bumbling around with probably the most powerful technology available to us, untapped resource of, sacred sexual union. And you cannot access that space through just intending to eye gaze, okay? Or like just loving your partner so much, or like really hoping you get good at blowjobs or something. Like, it's not about any of that. It's about the same anatomy of knowing yourself, knowing what you want, accessing what's behind your shame, knowing how to say no, knowing that your no and your limits, your safe word, whatever it is your responsibility to your partner. It's actually your offering, right? Because if I say, is it okay with you, you know, if I, run my hand down the front of your body and you say yes, but I'm not really sure I can trust that yes, then the caretaker in me the whole time is going to be like, oh, I wonder if he likes this. I wonder if I should stop now. Maybe he's bored. If we can live in a world where my yes is clear, right? I ask for what I want, and my no is trustworthy. We can organize ourselves around sovereign interactions in a way that will bring us to God. I mean, actually, this is David Data's work, that we can access these dimensions, through through the shared experience. So for me, a lot of it was just that inner work of understanding, how it is that I've been living in a very, very immature, unconscious place, thinking I've been having extraordinary sex. And in many ways I have, but I now see what is possible to unlock. And it has the same elements that every other aspect of sovereign living seems to. And a lot of the work that I've done over the past, I would say, year and a half has been around integrating my sexual identity into the rest of my persona, because it was really behind a secret wall. And I'm not saying everybody needs to do this work, certainly not. But for me, in my particular woundology, it has been very, very important to interact with the judgment and criticism, that I have experienced on the outside for acting inappropriately or doing things, publicly or whatever, or doing things that make people uncomfortable or that actually people feel is like reckless, for me to pole dance on Instagram or whatever. For me to interact with those judgments has been one of the most powerful spiritual practices of my life, because I've gotten to know the part of me that agrees with them. And I've also trusted my impulses to express myself creatively. And who knows, like I may partner with somebody in a year who's like, okay, I want you to never appear in something other than a burqa. And who knows, I might do it. I don't know what my trajectory is going to look
It's
like.
another type of BDSM, I think. But I
Exactly.
am wondering, like right now, it's like while you were having all these conversations, discussions about things like BDSM and the stuff you were just talking about, the fork on the thigh and all that, I'm sure at some point it had to have crossed your mind that somewhere in the organizational structure of this Christian app that you were on, that somebody, and probably part of it was sort of like, ha ha ha, yeah, bring it. How funny will that be? It's like, first of all, you joined a Christian app, which is
I
kind of
know.
hilarious in a way. I mean, you realize the irony in all of that, right? I mean, you see it.
I didn't. I actually didn't. I like chose not to. That's the thing. It's like how we get into
However.
the relationship that is destined to be a shit show. You ignore the inconvenient flags, right? Like I didn't even really fully register that it was like Christian. I was like, yeah, I believe in traditional man woman relating. I believe in committed relationships. And at least for now, I believe in monogamy, right? So, like, sign me up. And I just conveniently ignored, like, yeah, all of the reasons why I might not be a fit. But that's also a wound I have too. Like I will be rejected by, that which I want or what, so we all have this wound on some level. So like I subconsciously created the conditions for me to experience it. And it's a kink until it's conscious. And then I can bring that into the bedroom instead of in my actual life where I'm re-encountering these energies over and over again as if they're just happening to me. Yeah.
So it kind of says to me then that it really is the case that somewhere in your subconscious, you chose the experience altogether
100%.
from beginning to end.
100%.
And I believe that's what this world is. I believe we live in a world, I call it a spiritual life simulation game,
Mm.
that we are here to learn through opposites, that we are here to learn different principles and precepts, like it might be forgiveness or unconditional love or sexuality. And the way that we are to learn those things can only happen when we finally learn to stop judging the opposite of those things. So, for example, if we're here to learn forgiveness, then we have to learn how to no longer judge the things that have to be led up to the point where they actually lead to having to forgive them.
Yes.
And that's the only time that we've actually fully transmuted an issue or a challenge
I
or a problem.
totally, totally agree.
Yeah.
I remember I was sitting out on my porch, my old house, and it's so beautiful. And I was looking around, I was like, wow, this is so incredible. And I'm like alone here, right? I'm going to have animals, but I was alone and I felt lonely. I felt lonely, like I wanted to have that moment in some sort of a social context. And almost immediately, I had these voices in my head come online that said, "What are you talking about, Kelly? Your girlfriends were just here. You just had them over together, and you have such a rich, fabric of love in your life. And what's the problem?" And it wasn't until I really actually decided to give a shit what that lonely part had to say and listen non-coercively and develop intimacy with that lonely part without spiritually bypassing and coercing that part into feeling love and appreciation and acceptance of all that is and gratitude. That's where the transmutation was, at least for me, and has been in these moments, is to sit in the discomfort, to develop a capacity to be with it with curiosity before you try, to cognitive behavioral therapy yourself out of feeling the thing. Right? Which is, I think, a lot of the positivistic psychology sort of, it's the shadow of that, right? That you can just think your way into positive thoughts. Well, what about the part of you that is invested in and believes that something essential is gained by actually living in the illness, in the dysfunctional relationship, in, this victim
Experiencing the
story?
opposite.
Yeah.
I really believe that's so powerful. And then each one of us is providing this opportunity to the universe to observe itself through our unique eyes of perspective, which then feeds an Akashic record that's ever expanding. And when I think about that, it makes me also think about Carl Jung again and all of his work in alchemy. And that's what I spend a lot of time on. We could probably do a whole other podcast
Yes.
just on the what's called the alchemical marriage. So the alchemical marriage is really the representation of learning how to embrace the dark aspects of who you are as a person that you and your persona have delineated out as separate from you.
Yes.
And it begins to personify also an archetype that will appear in your life at the stage that's called rubedo. And the stage of rubedo is represented by a pelican. There's different birds. So you have nigredo, albedo, citrinidis, then rubedo, which is also the marriage of the red king and the white queen. This has been around for thousands of years, these precepts and concepts. And then you have the final phoenix stage. But in the rubedo phase is when you meet your twin flame. And this twin flame concept is like you're from one soul and you were basically cut in two. And they're literally like the opposite but complement of you.
Yeah, I've been there. Yes.
And it can be very painful, it can be very difficult because it's like a roller coaster ride.
Yeah.
But you're going through an alchemical journey to learn how to transcend the duality and return to oneness and God realization. That's kind of the entire point of it. And so it's such a powerful thing because sexuality plays such a big role in that. And so does BDSM, actually, in some way, shape, or form. And you'll find yourself undeniably attracted to somebody that you wouldn't normally be attracted to.
Yeah.
It might not be the right age group. It might not be the right, sort of socioeconomic background or standing. It might not be anything that you would have listed out on your vision board of who you intended to meet. But they are going to end up being that complementary aspect to your soul, returning to its oneness. And I wanted to ask you about your thoughts on this concept of twin flame union, which can be it's got such an interesting, and no men ever talk about it. So I'm raising it right now, but it has such a interesting um, response from society. One response, if they're in a good twin flame union that finally found its way to balance, people tend to speak very, in a very praiseworthy way related to it. But if you're in the opposite, which can often be the case with twin flames, because it's
Yeah.
literally a roller coaster ride, um, then you could be very negative on it.
Yeah. We used to call it a spiritual meat grinder, me and my former partner.
Okay, a spiritual meat grinder. So let's dig into that for just a moment.
Yeah, wow. I mean, it's such a huge topic, and I can speak to, I think, a couple of dimensions of it. I mean, I've written about this too because I became very interested in the victimless narration, right? Because when you work with the kind of pain that can surface through these dynamics, it is the deliciousness of your victim narrative is, it's almost irresistible, right? So in my practice, around this, I became interested in this concept of compatibility, right? And the compatibility of needs and what it is to mature and shift and, evolve one's needs. Is that possible? Can you do it with somebody's help? And the consensual agreement came up again, right? So are you and your partner who are fundamentally emotionally incompatible, right? So whether you're looking through the attachment lens and you have an avoidant and an anxious, or you're looking through the imago lens, which I think is very useful in this, it's kind of like a secular psychology framework for this spiritual concept of twin flame, the eroticized wound, if you will, that says that, you actually cannot meet your partner's basic emotional needs unless and if you choose to change because of them,
Yeah.
right? To lean in when you want to run, to self soothe when you want to grasp. If you are not electively choosing and consenting to do that, to allow your partner's wounds to guide your personal evolution and investment of time and energy, then you're not fundamentally in consent. And then you're actually just in an incompatible dynamic. And I think that it's possible that the twin flame concept spiritually, it arrests a lot of people in protracted fields of potentially even what could be called abuse,
Yeah, yeah.
because there's this
It can
idea
become
of like,
toxic for sure.
yeah, it's supposed to be hard work.
Mhm.
I'm in it, to change and evolve, and really, especially for anxiously attached folks, you're just in this self improvement churn of like trying to become the love object, right? And really, you're in limerence addiction, right? Like Pia Melody and others have written about this, right? Yeah, and I'm sure you even talked about it, that this this love addiction is no different from any other substance habit, and to evolve, mature, and grow beyond that, I don't know, the abstinence model has really helped me because I don't know that I could have done the work in the dynamic that I found myself in. And I am at the place, now where I, wake up and I feel awe and gratitude, for what was conferred through the dynamic, that I was in, over 8 years. And I don't think it could have come through another person in another time. It had to be that way, exactly that way. And of course, that requires that I actually give up hope, not on him, um, on my parents, right? That I actually give up hope that my parents will ever, 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 ever love me the way that my heart so deeply longs for them to love me. Okay. I have a great relationship with my parents to this day that I worked on, like a savage for years. And it's not about them really, right? It's about my inner child, right? It's archetypal. And if I am sourcing that impossible love from the impossible place, then I am going to resent and feel disappointment and feel rage and anger and victimhood and all the things, sometimes forever. I mean, people stay stuck in that rut. Um, because of twin flame dynamics. I mean, literally, you scroll social media, like 1 out of 2 videos is about recovering from a narcissistic, you know,
Yeah, I know.
relationship.
People all talk about it. They're like mine arc this and mine arc that, and it's kind of funny because the person that claims it's often a narcissist and an empath. It's very often the case, but that's kind of if you're going to cut something in two sides of a coin, that's
Yeah,
going to be how it
codependent.
is. But I would say that it's not only empathic people. I actually classify it as two forms of narcissism because narcissism is
Totally.
not true self-love. I would call it, inverted narcissism would be the empath, or
Yeah.
maybe covert narcissism.
Yes.
And then overt narcissism would be the other.
Totally.
And they just don't understand. I mean, I know plenty of people that are empaths that will say, you just don't know what it's like to be me. I feel everything and the whole world is like horrible because of it, and everyone has to fawn over the person and everything. That is an inverted narcissist.
Yes. Yeah.
It
It's
happens
a
all the time.
strategy. It's a
and
strategy.
and so, but I do believe in love, and I do believe that love has the ability to transcend all of it, transcend judgment, transcend. I wrote down, you may have seen it, I posted on Instagram. I said, I believe that enlightenment is when the expression of love supersedes the desire for an objective truth. And this is where I started realizing that what I was considering were facts that I'd been gathering in my life were not really facts, but they were merely facets of a larger truth. And that the only way to capture the whole truth would be to capture every possible subjective perspective or facet of that larger truth.
Yes.
And the larger truth altogether. And why do I experience all of it? The basis of it is because of love. It's all about the love. And I think that is what loving this experience, people think they have to escape Earth. So many people I know want to escape Earth, but the only way to transcend this samsara cycle of repetition is to learn it, to fall in love with it just as it is.
Mm.
It's acceptance and
Yeah.
falling in love with it. And then you no longer will need to be in this cycle because you've learned the precept, you've learned the principle. And that's what's the most beautiful aspect of life. So I think exploring all these things like you're talking about, and I do believe BDSM is an area that is about giving consent. For myself, I'll tell a story I've never told before.
I have that effect on people.
I lost my virginity in a very unusual way. It was with two girls that were much older than me, and I was way too young, right? And I look back on this now, and it definitely was a challenge for me because of that, because I had to deal with this feeling of both shame and delight, which was these two juxtaposed sort of, devil angel kind of feelings that kind of were antithetical to each other. And so it really impacted the way that I interacted with women, I think, at a subconscious level for so many years. And I think that's been released recently. And I'm very grateful that it's been released because I could finally feel as though I'm in a position of giving consent.
Absolutely. I mean, that is like a BDSM textbook trauma to resolve because, right, the coupling that's like any sexual abuse experience is by definition the coupling of pleasure with shame and wrongness, right? When a child is molested, most often there is pleasure involved, and the confusion of that is so shame inducing. And when you can revisit that through elective choice, and you can come to the hurt, the shame, the potential violation experience electively as an adult, that is almost awakens you to the orientation of your here and now. You come out of, the haze that can be induced through that kind of shame. And it's so possible, right? It's so powerful. So that's amazing. That is very unusual. And it also has a lot of the ingredients that so many of us experienced.
Yeah, it's not even something that I ever really thought that much about because when I was a kid, I repressed it so much.
Hmm.
But I still would think, oh, that was pretty cool. And then I would think, oh, that was bad. And then next thing I know, I'm a Mormon missionary in Korea, right? So how classic is that? Because I felt like I needed discipline and I didn't realize how one impacted the other, right? And that had happened when I was not even 12 years old yet. So, when something like that occurs, it will need to be transmuted. It's not a function of, we don't know how long it will take for that arc to come to its full fruition and circularity, but it will.
Yeah.
And I think I'm now at a stage in life where I think it's okay to explore bliss. And I don't have to be defined by the challenges I face.
Hmm.
That doesn't have to be me anymore. I'm not the mountain climber that's defined by Everest or by Kilimanjaro or any of the other things, or the taking a company public or succeeding in business or being a great leader or, publishing a book in mathematics. It doesn't matter. None of that really matters because it doesn't define who I am. The only thing that defines who I am is my own intention and my desire. And I can accept all of it. Kelly, thank you so much.
Yeah.
You got me to an emotional place. You didn't intend to, probably, but you did. And how can people find your work and sort of engage with it?
Well, thank you. Thank you for this conversation. I really, really enjoyed it. And it's not often that I get to play in all of these different realms. So thank you.
Thank you.
And yeah, I mean, with the censorship shuffle, who knows? But I guess it's probably still my website. It's kellybroganmd.com. I just started a podcast myself in January and came out the gate on the exact topics, that we're talking about today. So that's been really fun and well received. And so that's called Reclamation Radio. And then we'll see.
Okay, so kellybroganmd.com. And do you have a YouTube channel or something, or did you get?
I do. I do have a YouTube channel, but the podcasts are not on there. It's just on Apple. It's weird though how uncensored. I mean, I say whatever the hell I want so far, and it's like we just found out we're like top 1% podcasts like internationally. I haven't made it into that level of exposure since I don't even know when, since I was
Wow.
like naughty, right? So
Since
like
you were
since
naughty.
right. So now it's feeling really fun and clean, and who knows how long that'll last. But yeah, so it's just on Apple and Spotify and whatever.
The whole non-censorship thing is such an important topic for me. We didn't really cover it, but when you really realize the arc of everything we've been talking about, you have to experience a life without censorship. Because otherwise, how can we learn and grow? There have been so many times that people gave me countervailing opinions that I was triggered by very negatively
Mm,
initially. But then later I started to wear it and feel it and integrate it. And I learned so much as a result of it. It was another accumulation of another facet of a reality or a truth. I would hate to take away that opportunity from people because we live in such a regimented, censored world. And and that's why I'm very, very passionate about non-censorship, very passionate about free speech. And so I'm very, very not only passionate, but whenever I have passions about something, I tend to be someone who's going to actually create something out of it
yeah,
and
I
build a
see.
whole platform out of it or something. And I have, and I'm excited to be launching that soon. It's called Orion. But thank you for your voice. Thank you for your outspokenness, and also thank you for your humility. That's the what I'm struck with
Mm,
listening to you speak today, in how you were such a vociferous champion of what you thought was your truth to battle something and then transmute it into a beautiful realization about yourself.
yeah,
And to me, it's such a wonderful example. So I really thank you and applaud you for all that you've done and all that you are. You are more than enough.
that's beautiful. Thank you. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much. Well, such a pleasure. I hope to see you again soon, and have a great rest of your day.